Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning. Good afternoon. I have been coming on and off to Eternal Gardens, I think, over the last 3 years, as Christopher said, and as well as over the last day and a half now. One thing which obviously stands out most of the time is the khidmah, as we call it, the service. And that is that being looked after. You know, a person leaves their home, a person leaves their family, and they come to a foreign land like London, and they get looked after to feel home from home. And I must say, whether it's Tamara, Jane, and the rest of the team, sort of behind the scenes, and Asif and Tamkeen and the rest in front of the scenes, all my needs are met. The khidmah, the service that's provided is second to none. So I want to show an appreciation for that and acknowledge that. And a common theme which is coming through Jane's conversation with you as well as Christopher's conversation with you is about our shared humanity and also about the service. And I think that's what Eternal Gardens to me is about, is the service to the community and about shared humanity and making sure that people's needs are met, in making sure that people are satisfied with the service that's being provided, in going an extra mile in order to make sure that it is Sharia compliant. You know, this is an area, for example, which is a novel area for many people, and as we know, unfortunately, sometimes that word is used and misused in order to frighten folk. And to go head on and to grasp that for a private organization, which is not an Islamic organization or a Muslim organization, but to go head on and deal with that, I think that's something that should be commended and should be acknowledged. Going back to the sort of Sharia side of things, I sort of came on board 3-4 years back, as I said, but Mufti Dunka, who's there at the back, and Sheikh Haytham, and also Sheikh Yunus, and a number of other ulama that have been involved in providing that service to Eternal Gardens. Whether it be the type of grass that might be covering the grave, you know, something as simple as that, which may not cross people's mind, whether it's the use of pesticide, whether it's the use of a grass cutter that goes over the grave, every single minutiae of detail is brought to my attention and my opinion is sought on that particular matter. We live in unusual times and unusual circumstances, especially as you said in London. You know, it's a whole, I call it a country. Basically, life is completely different up north. And Islam doesn't work in a vacuum. The application of Islam, I'd give a mathematical formula. I was talking to a physicist earlier, and I mentioned that one of the reasons I dropped physics and did chemistry instead was because I didn't like the maths. Well, I will give you a bit of maths. The mathematical formula that we understand as scholars is text plus context equals fatwa. It is important that we understand that. And of course, when we look at our scripture and we look at the application of our scripture, predominantly that application of the scripture has been taking place in Muslim majority countries under the remit of a Sharia system. We live in completely different circumstances. Therefore, we have to take that context into consideration. One of the areas or one of the key issues that was of a concern to the community around Eternal Gardens and to Eternal Gardens was the lack of space for burials. We know cremation is not an option for Muslims because we consider the passage of the human both in body and soul in the grave when they go to Barzakh. And therefore, respecting the human in a life state is exactly the same as respecting the human in the state of death. We do not differentiate between the two. So therefore, cremation is not something which even comes on the agenda. However, but these constraints that now folk in London in particular are working under, access to land, how can we still be within the bounds of the Sharia, but at the same time take into consideration our context, take into consideration what befalls us? What is a pragmatic approach? Because we know that historical fuqaha, the ulama, they took a practical, pragmatic approach. So we find, for example, this work which I think carried on over several years, we tried to find the phrase for it, which we refer to as the duo fatwa, which was the best phrase we could come up with. Well, the understanding is that these are two separate compartments. This is key, because the Sharia understands that there has to be demarcation, there has to be separation between the two bodies which are at rest. So we take that premise. Then we take the context. What about the physical space? How are we supposed to cater for the growing demographic, as Christopher pointed out, and at the same time stay within these bounds? And that's where the dual fatwa comes in. It's a lengthy text, which I'm sure Christopher will be reading tonight as part of his late night reading. Because it might be that he struggles to fall asleep, so that's a perfect antidote for that. That is his homework. It is a lengthy piece of text. I find whenever somebody asks me, oh, Musa, what's your position on this particular thing? What's your position on this particular thing? And I've written on it, I always say to them, your punishment is you have to read the fatwa. I spent years, hours writing it. For crying out loud, you're going to read it. And I'll tell you the answer afterwards. Because a lot of time has gone into it, a lot of individuals, a lot of consultation. I think it took several years. But that again shows the carefulness. And in order to ensure that there is compliance within what the Muslims want to agree and live by, and at the same time taking these physical constraints into consideration. And I'm sure it's a physical document. I think there's a PDF also available, possibly on the website, which you can go to read. And it is referenced, it is detailed, all the material is there for all to see. The second point that we raised, we had a lengthy conversation, Jay and I and Christopher and Asif, with regards to when it comes to a person passing. Unfortunately, we don't make those kind of preparations, do we? We don't write a will. We don't write our wasiyah. Obviously, the will is the mirath. The wasiyah is the bequest. We don't write that. We don't leave those points of advice to our loved ones, what it is we want them to do. And death comes sometimes unplanned. And one of the things we don't prepare for is how our burial and the manner in which we will be buried is considered and discussed. Now we might say, well, surely that's obvious how we should be buried. Well, it's not, because you are quite fortunate in that you have private facilities like Eternal Gardens, which takes into consideration your understanding of your beliefs. Whereas when we look at, say, the cemeteries that are available up north, those options are not available. I intentionally, whenever I come to Eternal Gardens, take a small video and put it up on my WhatsApp status, and I get many ulama scholars writing back, oh, we should do something similar up north. Because there is, not envy, but there is a desire to have similar facilities in which everything is according to the Sunnah. You don't see any differences. There's, no monuments being built on the graves. They're kept very simple, just as we see in Baqi in Medina, where it's just the name written of the person, just so that people know that there's a grave here, hence this small mound, so that people don't step on it, walk on it, show disrespect towards it. And that is the facilities that you have here. But like I said, if we don't start talking about it now, if we don't have those conversations at home now, if we don't start making those requests to our children and loved ones that this is where I want to be, this is where I want to be buried, because this is the manner and this is the life that I chose, then, and as Christopher mentioned, I think 850 or so spaces left, and those spaces will go. There's no doubt about it. What we do as a community, and I mean as a community in a wholesome sense, moving forward, is something that everyone will need to be concerned about. Because these growths and these demands will continue. And it's how we meet those needs and how we go about. And as a community, we are responsible. And if we have partners like Eternal Gardens and others, then maybe they can facilitate that to happen. One of the questions that was, or one of the points that we discussed, and I hope Christopher doesn't mind, was sometimes we kind of shop for the best option. And we sometimes have concerns that, if this is a private company, then, is this a profitable, profiteering rather, organization? Are people profiteering from death of others? That's not a nice occupation or vocation to have. But as we found when organizations that I've worked for, that when we do work on a voluntary capacity, and I'm sure many of you here have worked with organizations in a voluntary capacity, after a while the will goes, the desire goes, the people move on, and then that organization, that dream, that thing that you wanted to achieve ceases to exist. So when you have an organization with its professionalism and ensuring that compliance is met, both from a legal perspective by UK law, but also the moral code that people live by, then you find that is a good mix and that success is achieved. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that everything is perfect with every organization, of course not. That just doesn't exist. Whether that's a community center, whether that's a masjid, or whether that's a Eternal Gardens. All will have their challenges and all will have continuous development and continuous assessment in order to improve. But as a community that's working with Eternal Gardens, it can help to point those kind of issues out. And whenever I've been here, some of the points that I do want to raise, and I hope that you can take these away, is we've discussed, for example, traffic that makes its way onto the, let's say Jane and I had these conversations over the years, traffic making its way towards the graves. And I mentioned to her, and I think she was somewhat dumbfounded, and I said, the Prophet ﷺ used to say that if you have impurity on your shoes, you should remove your shoes when you come to a graveyard. So how is our behavior as a Muslim community when we're driving cars fast around graves, when we're possibly littering? You know, these are sort of things as a community. Now I address my own community. This is as a community that we need to look at as well. It's not, we cannot have one and not the other. We enter into Islam holistically, completely. We don't pick and choose that this is something that I can live by, this is something that I don't. These rules and regulations are all that we need to abide by, so that we make this place, as it's mentioned, Eternal Gardens, a place of peace and a place where we can reflect, because the Prophet ﷺ encouraged people to visit the graves. And one of the reasons why he encouraged people to visit the graves is so we reflect on the finality of life and also the finiteness of it. That you're here today and you're gone tomorrow, so that we make preparations for the life which comes after. So again, I want to extend my thanks to the Eternal Gardens team and everybody who's looked after me whilst I've been here, and I look forward to the food that is being cooked for us.
There's over 100 burials over there already. The zones that are taped off are areas that are already been either planned for other organisations, and the 800 odd subplots that we have that Christopher mentioned earlier is the areas that you see within the squares in that area there. This area, those of you remember, these are trees over 4 or 5 years old, them oak trees. There's preservation orders on there, we can't cut them, so they're still there and they look lovely, and we don't want to cut them, that's our nature. And we've planted a lot more trees, I think over 200 trees. The ones that we took out, and then they've been replaced also. Yeah, so nothing more to do. Put the cameras out for look this up. I'll read out the plaque so that you know what's on the plaque here. Recognition for our newly expanded burial park. This tree stands as a testament to our enduring service to the community, planted by Mufti Amjad on today's date, 28th of 4th.
You missed Christopher's name.
I'm just here to help move it.
Yeah. One of the things about planting trees is that it's a form of sadaqah jariyah. When any creature eats from it, anybody takes shade from it, there's a reward in it, and that way. So not only is it something to mark this effort that's being made here, but also it's a form of ajr. So may Allah accept the efforts that everybody is making, and may it means a success for them. Ameen. Thank you, Lisa. I'll follow.
Yeah, that's good. I'd like to especially thank Kali and her team, who are the grants team, for doing this marvellous planning of the Zone 3. It looks beautiful, well done. What you see to the right there, that's been designed, is our new prayer bench. It's facing towards Mecca, so when the deceased comes, it will be now laid down on that side, if there's a burial this side in zone 3. In zone 2, that bench is still there, and we will pray here behind the deceased. So this is the new area. Jazakallah khair. If we can start making our way back, are we ready for the...